They say when you lose someone you truly love, you lose a part of yourself. An empty space in your heart remains. Charles Nightwell, a duke, had lost the love of his life 8 months ago, just 2 weeks before their marriage, and that hole still remains. For the first time in a long time, he was going to spend Christmas alone. No amount of liquor could drown his sorrows. On Christmas Eve, he took a walk through the streets near his estate, drowning in memories. Suddenly, thwack, a snowball struck the back of his head. With anger already boiling in his heart, he turned to see who had done it, only to find a 10-year-old girl laughing as she ran away. His anger melted. A faint smile crossed his face. As he brushed the snow from his coat, a soft voice spoke behind him, almost like an angel. He raised his head and, to his surprise, a beautiful lady with beautiful eyes was standing in front of him, eyes that, if you looked at them for too long, you might get lost in them. The Duke did not mind at that moment. He felt a lively spark within, though his expression remained cold and unbothered. "I'm so sorry for my sister's behavior," she said with an apologetic smile. "She's a lot to handle." "It's nothing to worry about," he replied. She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't look like you're in the Christmas spirit. We live just down the street. My father is hosting a friendly neighborhood dinner tomorrow night. You should come, consider it my apology for the snowball attack." She smiled warmly and walked away. She had no idea she'd just invited a duke to dinner. That night, Charles lay awake. Her image burned into his mind. Will he go to the dinner? Will one chance encounter be enough to heal a broken heart? 8 months earlier, Charles Nightwell sat alone in his room, the bottle of whiskey cold against his palm. He had relieved everyone of their duties hours ago, the servants, the footmen, even Thompson, his loyal valet who had served him since boyhood. He wanted to be left alone. He didn't need a cup. What was the point of civility now? The amber liquid burned his throat, but not enough to burn away the memories. Eleanor's laugh, bright as morning bells. The way she'd tilt her head when she was thinking, a small smile playing at her lips. The plans they'd made, whispered in stolen moments when chaperones weren't watching. 4 children at least, she'd said, her eyes dancing. 2 boys, 2 girls. We'll name the first girl Margaret, after your mother. And the first boy, he'd asked, pulling her closer in the garden shadows. Charles, of course, though he'll have your stubbornness, I'm sure. Everything had been picture perfect. The wedding planned for 2 weeks hence, the dress completed, the flowers ordered, white roses her favorite. White roses now covered her grave. Charles took another long drink, welcoming the haze that softened the edges of his grief. Death had taken it all away in a single afternoon. A riding accident, a startled horse, a fall that should have been nothing but a bruise. But internal bleeding was invisible, and by the time the doctors understood, it was too late. She was his better half. Everyone said so. Where he was reserved, she was warm. Where he was duty-bound, she was joyful. Where he saw obstacles, she saw possibilities. Now half of him was gone, missing. The wound gaped open in his chest, and he knew it would never close. He raised the bottle in a bitter toast to the empty room. "To Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracking, "the only woman I will ever love." The fire crackled in the hearth, the only response. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season. Charles watched the flakes drift past the window, each one perfect and whole before melting into nothing. Just like her, just like everything. It would take a miracle to be whole again. A Christmas miracle, perhaps. But Charles didn't believe in miracles anymore. 3 days later, the funeral was held. Charles stood at the graveside in his black mourning coat, his face carved from stone. The vicar spoke words meant to comfort eternal rest, peace everlasting, the Lord's grace, but they slid off Charles like rain off marble. Eleanor's family wept. His own mother, the Dowager Duchess, stood pale and silent beside him. Friends and nobles filled the churchyard, their faces properly somber. Charles felt nothing. Or rather, he felt everything at once, a crushing weight that threatened to drive him into the earth alongside Eleanor's coffin. When it was over, when the last mourner had pressed his hand and murmured their condolences, Charles returned to Nightwell Manor. He walked past the ballroom where they were to have held the wedding breakfast, past the portrait gallery where her likeness was to have been hung alongside generations of Nightwell duchesses. He climbed the stairs to his chambers and locked the door. The bottle waited. The next morning, Thompson found him slumped in the chair by the cold fireplace, still wearing his funeral clothes, the empty whiskey bottle on the floor beside him. "Your Grace," the valet said softly, "you must eat something. You must rest properly." Charles's voice was hoarse. "Leave me." "Sir, you cannot." "Leave me." Thompson hesitated, his weathered face creasing with worry. He'd known Charles since the boy was 8 years old, had served his father before him, but the look in his young master's eyes was one he'd never seen before. Emptiness. "As you wish, Your Grace." Thompson bowed and withdrew. Charles remained in that chair as the winter sun tracked across the floor. He remained as it set. He remained as darkness filled the room once more. The doctor called. His mother sent messages. His solicitor requested urgent meetings regarding the estate. Charles ignored them all. Days blurred into weeks. He functioned when he had to sign papers, thrust before him, attended absolutely necessary meetings, performed the bare minimum required of a duke, but he was a ghost in his own life. At night, he dreamed of Eleanor. In his dreams, she was alive and laughing, spinning in her wedding dress, reaching for his hand. But whenever he touched her, she vanished like smoke, and he woke gasping in the dark, grief crashing over him anew. The staff whispered, "The Duke is lost. The Duke is broken. The Duke will never recover." They were right. 8 months passed in this numb, grey existence. Winter deepened, snow fell and melted and fell again. Christmas approached, that season of joy and celebration and family. Charles dreaded it. This was to have been their first Christmas as man and wife. Instead, it would be his first Christmas truly alone. No Eleanor, no hope, no future worth imagining. Just endless winter, stretching before him like a sentence with no end. He stood at his study window on Christmas Eve, watching servants hurry through the streets below, their arms full of packages and greenery. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, calling the faithful to evening services. Charles turned away. He needed air. He needed to escape these walls, even if there was no escaping his own mind. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the frozen night, into the snow-covered streets near his estate, drowning in memories. And that's when it happened. Thwack. The months between Eleanor's death and that Christmas Eve had been a study in careful performance. Charles Nightwell, 7th Duke of Blackmore, learned to wear his grief like a perfectly tailored coat, somber, dignified, appropriate for public viewing. The ton expected a certain standard of mourning from a man of his station, and he gave it to them. Black armbands, subdued colors, a properly grave expression at social functions he could not avoid. But it was all theater. Inside, he was still that man slumped in a chair with an empty bottle, still that figure standing at a graveside watching his future being lowered into the ground. "Your Grace, the tenant's Christmas fund requires your signature," his steward would say. Charles signed. "Your Grace, Lady Ashworth has invited you to her winter ball." Charles declined. "Your Grace, your mother wishes to know if you'll join the family for Christmas." Charles stared at the letter until the words blurred, then penned a brief refusal. The estate ran itself, more or less. His father had built an efficient system, and his staff was loyal and capable. They needed him to sign papers, to make occasional decisions, to maintain the appearance of ducal authority. They didn't need him. Not really. In public, Charles was everything a duke should be: controlled, courteous, impossibly distant. At Parliament, he voted according to his family's traditional positions. At his club, he nursed a single brandy in the corner, discouraging conversation with his cold demeanor. At church, he sat in the Nightwell family pew, his face impassive as the vicar preached about God's love and mercy. Charles heard none of it. People whispered, "Of course." The ton always whispered, "Such a tragedy, and so close to the wedding. He's never recovered, poor man. They say he's refused every introduction since, won't even look at another woman." Well, that's devotion, isn't it? Rather romantic. Charles found nothing romantic about it. Devotion implied choice. This was simply existence, breathing, walking, fulfilling obligations, because stopping would cause more trouble than continuing. His mother tried, in her careful way. "Charles, darling, perhaps a change of scenery. We could travel to Bath, or perhaps the continent." "No, thank you." "Mother, you cannot mourn forever, my dear. Eleanor wouldn't have wanted." "Please don't tell me what Eleanor would have wanted." His voice was quiet, but it cut like ice. The Dowager Duchess withdrew, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Charles felt a flicker of guilt, but even that felt distant, muted, like everything else. In private, the mask came off. Alone in Nightwell Manor's vast, echoing halls, Charles was nothing. He moved through rooms like a spectre, barely noticing the servants who scurried out of his way. He took his meals in his study when he remembered to eat at all. He slept poorly, waking at odd hours to walk the corridors, past the room that was to have been Eleanor's sitting room, past the nursery wing that would now remain forever empty. Thompson managed the worst of it. The valet appeared with food when Charles forgot to call for it, laid out clothes appropriate to each day's demands, and tactfully removed bottles before they became too numerous. He never commented, never judged. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" "No, thank you, Thompson." It was the same exchange every day, a ritual of normalcy in a life that felt anything but normal. As Christmas approached, the weight grew heavier. The manor's housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson, asked about decorations. "Shall we dress the house for the season, Your Grace? Nothing elaborate, of course, given the circumstances, but perhaps some greenery in the main halls." Charles looked at her kind, weathering face and saw pity there. He hated pity. "Do as you see fit, Mrs. Dawson." She curtsied and left, and Charles knew she would order minimal decorations, appropriately subdued. The house would acknowledge Christmas without celebrating it, much like its master. Invitations piled on his desk, Christmas parties, holiday gatherings, a charitable ball for the parish poor. The cream of society wanted the Duke of Blackmore's presence, his title lending weight to their festivities. He refused them all. "Your Grace cannot become a complete recluse," his secretary ventured nervously. "Your position requires certain appearances." "After Christmas," Charles said flatly. "I'll attend whatever is necessary after Christmas. Just get through Christmas." That was all he had to do. Survive this one terrible milestone, and then, well, then it would be another year, further from Eleanor, deeper into this grey existence. On Christmas Eve morning, Charles woke to find snow falling thick and fast outside his window. The city was transforming into something from a fairy tale, white and pristine and beautiful. He felt nothing. Thompson brought his breakfast tray. "A cold one today, Your Grace. Best stay inside by the fire." But Charles couldn't bear the thought of staying inside these walls for another moment. The manor felt like a mausoleum, and he was the only living thing trapped within it. "I'm going out," he announced, surprising even himself. Thompson's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Very good, sir. Shall I have the carriage prepared?" "No, I'll walk." "Walk, Your Grace? In this weather?" "Yes." Thompson knew better than to argue with that tone. He helped Charles into a heavy greatcoat, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and handed him his gloves with the solemn air of a man arming a soldier for battle. Perhaps that's what it was. Charles versus Christmas. Charles versus joy. Charles versus the whole celebrating world that had moved on while he remained frozen in time. He stepped out into the snow. The streets near his Mayfair estate were busy despite the cold. Families hurried past, children squealing with excitement, parents laden with packages wrapped in bright paper. A vendor sold roasted chestnuts on the corner, the smell warm and inviting. Charles walked with his head down, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wasn't sure where he was going. Away, anywhere, toward the oblivion of cold and movement and distraction. Around him, London prepared for Christmas. Wreaths hung on doors, candles glowed in windows. Somewhere nearby, carolers sang about peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Charles felt none of it. He was drowning in memories. Eleanor laughing at last year's Christmas ball, Eleanor helping him choose gifts for his mother, Eleanor whispering her Christmas wish in his ear. "Just you. That's all I want. You, and every Christmas after this one, forever." Forever had lasted exactly one Christmas. His chest tightened. His breathing grew shallow. He needed to turn back, to retreat to the safety of his study and his solitude, and his thwack. The snowball hit the back of his head with surprising force. For a moment, Charles stood frozen, snow sliding down his collar in cold rivulets. Anger flared hot in his chest, the first real emotion he'd felt in months that wasn't grief. Someone had dared. Someone had the audacity to. He spun around, ready to unleash 8 months of pent-up fury on whoever had been foolish enough to assault a duke, and stopped. A little girl stood 15 feet away, her mittened hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with mingled glee and terror. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, bundled in a coat that was slightly too large, a knitted cap sliding down over one ear. Their eyes met. She bolted. "Wait," Charles called. But she was already running, her laughter trailing behind her like bells, her boots kicking up little explosions of snow as she disappeared around the corner. Charles stood there, his hand halfway raised, his prepared tirade dying on his lips. And then, impossibly, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was small, it barely counted, but the corners of his mouth lifted and something in his chest loosened, just a fraction. A child's laughter, a snowball, the sheer absurdity of it. He shook his head, brushing snow from his coat, and that's when he heard the voice behind him. "I'm so terribly sorry." The voice was like music, soft and warm, with an apologetic lilt that somehow conveyed both embarrassment and amusement. Charles turned, and the world shifted. She stood there in the falling snow, framed by the white-dusted street like a figure in a painting. She wasn't dressed for high society. Her coat was simple, wool, her bonnet practical rather than fashionable. But there was something in her face, in her eyes, that stopped his breath. Those eyes, they were the color of amber catching sunlight, warm and clear and impossibly kind. Eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed walls, past the Duke, past the grief, to something underneath he'd thought long dead. Eyes that, if you looked at them too long, you might get lost in them. Charles didn't mind. Not in that moment. "I'm so sorry for my sister's behavior," she continued, stepping closer. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, or perhaps from chasing the child. A few strands of dark hair had escaped her bonnet, curling against her neck. "She's a lot to handle sometimes. Truly, I apologize. Are you hurt?" Charles realized he was staring. He cleared his throat, trying to remember how to speak like a normal human being. "It's nothing to worry about." She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him feel oddly transparent. "You don't look like you're in the Christmas spirit." It wasn't an accusation, just an observation, delivered with such gentle directness that Charles found himself unable to summon his usual cold dismissal. "I suppose I'm not," he admitted. "That's a shame." She smiled then, and it transformed her entire face, chasing away the concern and replacing it with something radiant. "Christmas is meant for joy, even when joy seems impossible." The words struck something deep inside him, especially when joy seems impossible. That's what she meant, wasn't it? He could hear it in her voice. She knew something about impossible joy, about finding light in darkness. Before he could respond, she stepped back slightly, glancing in the direction her sister had fled. "We live just down the street. My father is hosting a friendly neighborhood dinner tomorrow night, Christmas dinner. You should come." Charles blinked. "I couldn't possibly. Consider it my apology for the snowball attack." Her smile widened, playful now. "I promise my sister will be on her best behavior. Mostly, probably. I don't even know your name." "Lily," she said simply. "Lily Ashford. And you are?" For a wild moment, Charles almost told her. Almost said, "Charles Nightwell, Duke of Blackmore. And I absolutely cannot attend a neighborhood dinner because I'm supposed to be in mourning, and I don't deserve to sit at anyone's table pretending to be whole." Instead, he said, "Charles. Just Charles. Not a duke, not a title. Just a man standing in the snow, talking to a woman with kind eyes." "Well, Charles," Lily said, her voice warm with invitation. "Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock, the house with the green door, 3 streets over on Ashford Lane." She paused, her expression softening. "Everyone needs somewhere to be on Christmas, even people who think they'd rather be alone." How did she know? How could she possibly know? But before he could ask, she'd curtsied a gesture both proper and somehow teasing and turned to go, calling over her shoulder, "I do hope you'll come." Charles stood motionless as she walked away, her figure growing smaller against the white landscape until she turned a corner and disappeared. The street returned to its previous bustle. The chestnut vendor called his wares. A carriage rolled past, its wheels crunching in the snow. Life continued, indifferent to the fact that something fundamental had just shifted in Charles's carefully ordered world. He raised a hand to the back of his head where the snowball had struck. Lily. The name settled in his mind like a seed finding soil. Lily Ashford, 3 streets over, green door. He turned slowly and began walking back toward the manor, but his steps were different now, less leaden, less automatic. His mind replayed the encounter, her voice, her eyes, that smile that seemed to carry its own warmth, independent of the winter cold. Everyone needs somewhere to be on Christmas. Did he need somewhere to be? For 8 months, He'd needed nothing but solitude and whiskey and the blessed numbness of routine. But standing there, looking into those amber eyes, he'd felt something flicker to life, something small and fragile, like a candle flame in a draught. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. Thompson was waiting when Charles returned to the manor, brushing snow from his shoulders in the entrance hall. "Did you have a pleasant walk, Your Grace?" Charles paused, truly considering the question. Yes, perhaps. I'm not certain." Thompson's eyebrows rose, fractionally the most expression the proper valet ever allowed himself. "Indeed, sir? I met someone, a woman. She invited me to dinner." Now both eyebrows climbed. "A woman, Your Grace?" "It's not." Charles stopped himself. What was it? What was he even thinking? "It's a neighborhood Christmas dinner, tomorrow evening. Nothing significant." "Of course not, sir." But something in Thompson's voice suggested otherwise. Charles retreated to his study, but for the first time in months, he couldn't settle. He paced to the window, sat at his desk, rose again, poured a drink, then set it down, untouched. Lily. He tried to summon guilt, tried to feel the betrayal he knew he should feel. Eleanor had been dead only 8 months. 8 months. How dare he even notice another woman? How dare her voice echo in his mind? How dare those eyes? But the guilt wouldn't come. Or rather, it came, but it was complicated now, tangled with other feelings. Curiosity, interest, a strange, tentative warmth. Everyone needs somewhere to be on Christmas. Charles sank into his chair and stared at the fire. Did he need somewhere to be? Or was he content here, in this self-imposed exile, faithful to a ghost? Eleanor's portrait hung above the mantel, a small watercolor he'd commissioned just months before her death. She was laughing in it, her head thrown back, full of life and light. "What would you tell me?" he whispered to the portrait. "What would you want me to do?" The painted Eleanor smiled, forever captured in that moment of joy, offering no answers. That night, Charles lay awake, staring at the canopy of his bed. Her image burned into his mind. Not replacing Eleanor, nothing could ever replace Eleanor, but existing alongside her somehow, a separate brightness in the darkness. Lily. The snow had stopped falling. Through his window, he could see stars emerging, cold and distant and beautiful. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow, he could sit alone in this manor, honoring his grief with isolation. Or tomorrow, he could walk 3 streets over to a house with a green door and see where possibility might lead. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 8 months, Charles Nightwell fell asleep without dreaming of death. Charles woke on Christmas morning to pale winter light filtering through his curtains and the immediate, crushing weight of decision. 6 o'clock, green door, Ashford Lane. He'd remembered. Of course he'd remembered. The invitation had circled through his mind all night, weaving between dreams he couldn't quite recall upon waking. Thompson appeared with breakfast and the day's clothing laid out with his usual precision, somber colors, appropriate for a duke in mourning. "Merry Christmas, Your Grace." "And to you, Thompson." The valet set the tray down, then hesitated. "Will you be going out this evening, sir?" So Thompson had remembered too. Had probably stayed awake half the night, wondering if his master was finally beginning to heal. "I haven't decided," Charles said, which was a lie. He'd decided a dozen times during the night, yes, no, until the words lost all meaning. "Of course, sir. I'll have appropriate attire ready, should you choose to attend." After Thompson left, Charles pushed his breakfast around the plate without eating. Through his study window, he could see London decked in its Christmas finery. Church bells rang across the city, calling the faithful to morning services. Families would be gathering now, children tearing into presents, warmth and laughter filling homes across every street. Eleanor had loved Christmas. The memory came unbidden, sharp and vivid. Last Christmas, nearly a year ago now, though it felt like both yesterday and a lifetime, they'd attended the Ashworth ball together, Eleanor radiant in green silk that matched her eyes. She'd worn holly in her hair, a playful touch that scandalized the older matrons and delighted everyone else. "Dance with me," she'd whispered, pulling him onto the floor despite his protests that he was a terrible dancer. "You're not terrible," she'd laughed, fitting perfectly into his arms. "You're just too serious. Feel the music, Charles. Let it move you." He'd tried. For her, he'd always tried. Later, in a quiet corner away from prying eyes, she'd kissed him beneath a sprig of mistletoe. "Next Christmas," she'd promised, "we'll be married. We'll host our own ball." We'll dance until dawn. Until dawn? He'd teased. You'll be exhausted, then you'll carry me to bed. Her eyes had sparkled with mischief and something deeper. My husband, imagine that, he'd imagined it, had counted down the days until she'd be his wife, until every Christmas would be theirs together, until Charles pressed his palms against his eyes, willing the memory away. Next Christmas, she'd said. She'd been so certain of their future, so full of plans and promises. She'd had no idea she had less than 3 months left. Guilt twisted in his stomach. What was he doing, even considering this dinner? Eleanor had been gone only 8 months. 8 months, hardly any time at all, in the grand scheme of grief. He should be here, in this house, honoring her memory, not running off to some stranger's home, charmed by a pretty face and kind eyes. But Eleanor wouldn't want you to be miserable, a small voice whispered in his mind. Charles shoved it away. That voice was treacherous. That voice made excuses. He stood abruptly and began to pace. The study felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. He needed air. He needed to move. He needed to stop thinking about amber eyes and warm smiles and the way Lily had said, everyone needs somewhere to be on Christmas. He grabbed his coat and headed out into the morning cold, his feet carrying him without conscious direction. The streets were quieter than yesterday. Most families already gathered inside for their celebrations. The few people Charles passed offered cheerful, Merry Christmas greetings that he returned automatically, his mind elsewhere. He found himself walking the same route as yesterday, past the chestnut vendor's empty corner, past the shop windows dressed in their holiday best, toward the streets where, no, he wasn't going there. He was just walking, just clearing his head, but his feet kept moving, and before he quite realized it, he was standing on Ashford Lane, looking at the houses with their modest but cheerful decorations. Which one had the green door? What are you doing? His rational mind demanded. You're not actually considering this. You're not going to attend some stranger's dinner like a lost puppy looking for scraps of warmth. But another part of him, a part that had been silent for so long he'd almost forgotten it, existed, whispered different words. What if you do? What if you take this one risk? What if there's something there worth finding? A sound made him turn. Snow was falling from a tree branch overhead, dislodged by a bird or perhaps just the weight of accumulated ice. It fell in a white cascade, landing on the exact spot where Charles had been standing just moments before he stepped forward. He stared at the pile of snow. If he hadn't moved, it would have struck him. Just like yesterday's snowball, just like... It wasn't a sign. Charles didn't believe in signs. But he smiled slightly anyway, shaking his head at his own foolishness. You're being ridiculous, he muttered to himself. Talking to yourself is the first sign of madness, you know. Charles spun around. A man stood on the steps of the house behind him, a house, Charles now noticed, with a green door. He was perhaps in his 50s, with greying hair and spectacles perched on his nose. His expression was gentle, curious, and somehow knowing. Charles fumbled for words. I apologize. I was just taking a walk, the man supplied helpfully. On Christmas morning? In front of my house? Heat crept up Charles's neck. I wasn't meaning to intrude. No intrusion at all. The man descended the steps, his smile growing. You wouldn't happen to be the gentleman my daughter Lily mentioned? The one who received a rather unexpected snowball to the head yesterday? Charles found himself returning the smile, despite his embarrassment. Yes, that would be me, Charles Blackwell. The lie came easily, his mother's maiden name, close enough to the truth. Edmund Ashford. The man extended his hand, and Charles shook it. Professor of literature at the university, though that's rather grand for what amounts to teaching bored young men about Shakespeare. I'm sure you're more successful than you credit yourself. Perhaps. Edmund's eyes twinkled behind his spectacles. My daughter invited you to dinner tonight, I believe. She did, though I'm not certain. Whether you should come? Edmund finished. His expression turned more serious, more understanding. You have the look of a man carrying a heavy burden, if you don't mind me saying so. Christmas can make those burdens feel heavier. Charles nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. My wife died 4 years ago, Edmund said quietly. Cancer. The first Christmas without her, I thought I might die myself from the weight of it. Lily was 16, Daisy only 6. They needed me, but I could barely function. I'm sorry, Charles managed. Grief is a strange companion, isn't it? Edmund looked up at the grey sky, snowflakes catching in his hair. It convinces us that isolation is honor, that suffering alone somehow proves our love. But I've learned something in 4 years, Mr. Blackwell. What's that? That love doesn't ask for loneliness. It asks for life. Edmund met his eyes again. My wife Margaret was her name. She would have been furious if I'd wasted my life mourning her. She'd have wanted me to laugh again, to find joy again, not to forget her, never that. But to live. Charles's throat tightened. And have you found joy again? Some days, Edmund smiled. More days, as time passes, and today I'll find it in watching my daughters laugh, in sharing a meal with neighbors and friends, in making new memories that don't erase the old ones but stand alongside them. He turned toward his house, then paused. 6 o'clock, Mr. Blackwell. The door will be open. You're welcome at our table, whatever burdens you carry. Charles walked slowly back to the manor, Edmund's words echoing in his mind. Love doesn't ask for loneliness. It asks for life. Would Eleanor have wanted him frozen like this? Would she have wanted him to reject every kindness, every possibility, every moment of potential warmth? He thought of her laugh, her joy, her absolute certainty that life was meant to be lived fully. She would have told him to go. She would have pushed him out the door herself if she could. But knowing that and doing it were different things entirely. By 5 o'clock, Charles still hadn't decided. He stood in his dressing room while Thompson laid out evening attire, nothing too formal, appropriate for a simple dinner party. The carriage is ready whenever you require it, Your Grace. Thompson. Charles turned to face his valet. Am I making a mistake? Thompson, who never offered opinions unasked, considered the question carefully. I think, sir, that there are many kinds of mistakes. Attending a dinner is one kind. Spending the rest of your life alone in this house is another. But Eleanor would want you happy, sir. Thompson's voice was firm. I knew Miss Eleanor. She had the warmest heart of anyone I've ever met. She wouldn't want this for you. Charles felt something crack in his chest. It's just dinner, Thompson added softly. If it's dreadful, you can leave. But if you don't go, you'll spend the rest of the night wondering what you might have missed. At 5:45, Charles stood at the front door of Nightwell Manor, dressed and ready. His hand was on the doorknob. All he had to do was turn it, walk out, get in the carriage, or he could turn around, go back to his study, and let this moment pass. Everyone needs somewhere to be on Christmas. Charles thought of Eleanor's portrait, her eternal smile. He thought of Edmund's words about life and love. He thought of Lily's kind eyes and the way she'd looked at him like he was a person, not a title, not a tragedy. He thought of the snowball that had struck him yesterday, the child's laughter, the first smile he'd worn in 8 months. He took a deep breath and turned the doorknob. The house with the green door glowed with warmth against the winter darkness. Charles stood on the street corner, his carriage waiting behind him, and stared at that simple wooden door as if it were the entrance to another world entirely. Light spilled from the windows. He could hear voices inside, laughter, conversation, the clink of dishes. A wreath of holly and ivy hung on the door, tied with a red ribbon that fluttered in the evening breeze. It was so different from Nightwell Manor, with its grand entrance and liveried footmen and cathedral-like silence. This was a home. Your Grace, his driver called softly. Shall I wait? Charles almost said yes, almost told the man to keep the horses ready for a quick escape. Instead, he heard himself say, no, return in 2 hours. The carriage rolled away, and Charles was committed. He climbed the 3 steps to the green door and knocked. The door flew open before his knuckles had finished rapping. You came. Daisy stood there, her face lit up with delight, still wearing the same oversized coat from yesterday but with a ribbon tied in her hair for the occasion. Lily said you might not, but I knew you would. I told her, I said, he'll come, you'll see. Daisy, let the poor man inside before he freezes. Lily's voice came from somewhere behind her sister, warm with amusement. Daisy grabbed Charles's hand with surprising strength and pulled him inside. The entrance hall was tiny compared to his own, a narrow space with hooks for coats and a small table holding a lamp. But it was decorated with evergreen boughs, and the air smelled of cinnamon and roasted meat and something sweet baking. Lily appeared from a doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. She'd changed since yesterday. Her dress was simple but becoming, a deep blue that made her eyes seem to glow in the lamplight. Her hair was pinned up, though a few rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face. She looked beautiful. Charles, she said, and her smile was like sunrise. I'm so glad you came. Here, Let me take your coat. I hope I'm not intruding. Nonsense. She hung his coat beside several others. Father's been looking forward to meeting you properly. Come, everyone's in the dining room. Daisy still held his hand, and she tugged him forward with the confidence of a child who'd already decided they were friends. The dining room was small but cheerful, lit by candles and a fire crackling in the hearth. A modest table was set for 8 good china. Not fine, but carefully arranged with sprigs of holly at each place. Edmund Ashford stood near the fire, talking with 2 other men Charles didn't recognize. When he saw Charles, his face broke into a welcoming grin. "Ah, Mr. Blackwell, you found us. Excellent." He crossed the room to shake Charles's hand. "Let me introduce you. This is Thomas Green, our local vicar, and his son William." The vicar was a round, cheerful man with a shock of white hair. His son appeared to be in his early 20s, tall and thin, with an earnest expression. "Delighted," the vicar boomed. "Any friend of the Ashfords is welcome indeed. Are you new to the neighborhood?" "In a manner of speaking," Charles said carefully. The lie was growing more complicated. "I live nearby." "Well, you've chosen a fine family to know. Edmund here is one of the most learned men in London, though he's too modest to admit it." Edmund waved this away. "Thomas flatters me. Charles, you'll sit here, next to Lily. Daisy, release the poor man's hand so he can breathe." Daisy reluctantly let go, but claimed the seat on Charles's other side with a possessive air that made Lily hide a smile behind her hand. The 8th chair, Charles noted, remained empty. "Mrs. Patterson sends her regrets," Edmund explained, catching his glance. "A cold kept her home, but she sent along her famous apple tart for dessert." They settled around the table, and Edmund said a simple grace thanking God for food, for friends, for the gift of Christmas and the blessing of companionship. Charles bowed his head, but the words washed over him. He was too aware of Lily beside him, of the way candlelight caught in her hair, of the faint scent of lavender that seemed to surround her. Dinner began with a rich soup, served by Lily herself from a tureen. "No servants tonight," Edmund explained. "We gave our cook the evening off to spend with her family. Lily's been slaving in the kitchen all day." "Hardly slaving," Lily said, ladling soup into Charles's bowl. "I enjoy cooking. It's creative, like painting but with food." "Do you paint?" Charles asked. "A little. Nothing serious. But I like the idea of creating something beautiful from simple ingredients." Daisy piped up. "Lily makes the best cakes in all of London. Tell him about the chocolate one you made for my birthday." "Daisy, eat your soup." "But it's true. Even Father said it was better than anything at the fancy bakery." "Daisy." The child subsided with a dramatic sigh, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. Charles found himself smiling. The easy affection between the sisters was infectious, filling the room with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Conversation flowed as naturally as the wine Edmund poured. The vicar told amusing stories about Christmas pageants gone wrong, shepherds who forgot their lines, wise men who tripped over their robes, a donkey who ate part of the manger. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he chuckled, "but sometimes his ways involve livestock with poor timing." William, the vicar's son, was studying medicine. He spoke enthusiastically about new techniques in surgery, though Lily gently redirected him when his descriptions grew too graphic for the dinner table. "William forgets that not everyone finds dissection as fascinating as he does," she said kindly. "My apologies," William said, flushing. "I get carried away." "Passion is nothing to apologize for," Edmund said. "The world needs people who care deeply about their work." Charles listened more than he spoke, content to observe this gathering of ordinary people living ordinary lives with extraordinary warmth. No one asked him probing questions. No one treated him with the deference or careful distance he was accustomed to. Here, he was simply Charles, a neighbor, a guest at their table. It was liberating. Between courses, Daisy turned to him with the directness only children possess. "Why were you so sad yesterday?" "Daisy!" Lily's voice was sharp. "What?" He looked sad. "He still looks a little sad, even now. I just want to know why." The table fell silent. Edmund looked apologetic, the vicar concerned, William embarrassed. But Charles found he didn't mind the question. There was no malice in it, no prying curiosity, just genuine, innocent concern. "I lost someone I loved," he said simply. "Someone very important to me. Like how we lost Mama?" "Daisy," Lily began, but Charles shook his head slightly. "Yes," he said, "like that." Daisy considered this. her young face solemn. "Lily says, Mama's in heaven now, watching over us. Maybe your person is there too, watching over you." "Maybe," Charles agreed, his throat tight. "Do you think they can see us at Christmas?" "I think they can. I think heaven must have windows, and they can look down and see all the people they love having dinner and being happy." She tilted her head. "I think it would make them sad if we were all sad all the time, don't you?" Out of the mouths of babes, Charles looked at this child, this wise, innocent, oddly perceptive child, and felt something shift in his chest. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think you're right." Daisy beamed at him, satisfied, and returned to her dinner. Lily caught his eye across the table. Her expression was soft, understanding, and something more, gratitude, perhaps, that he'd answered her sister with honesty instead of dismissal. The main course was a roasted goose, perfectly golden, and accompanied by potatoes, vegetables, and a rich gravy that made Charles realize he hadn't eaten a proper meal in months. "This is exceptional," he said, and meant it. "Lily's doing," Edmund said proudly. "She's kept this household running since her mother passed. I'd be lost without her." "Father, you'd be perfectly fine. I'd be eating cold sandwiches and forgetting to pay the coal man," Edmund corrected gently. "You're the heart of this home, daughter. Don't diminish that." Lily blushed, but pleasure shone in her eyes. Charles found himself studying her, really looking at her for the first time. She wasn't just beautiful, she was capable, strong, gentle, and wise beyond her years. She'd lost her mother young and stepped into that role for her sister, sacrificing her own youth to hold her family together. Just as he'd been drowning in grief, she'd been swimming through hers, keeping others afloat. Two different responses to the same wound. He wondered what that said about them. After dinner, they moved to the small sitting room for dessert and conversation. Mrs. Patterson's apple tart proved every bit as delicious as promised. Daisy ate 2 slices and fell asleep on the sofa, her head pillowed on her father's lap. The vicar and his son eventually took their leave, thanking Edmund for the hospitality and wishing Charles a Merry Christmas with genuine warmth. Edmund carried a sleeping Daisy up to bed, leaving Charles and Lily alone in the sitting room. The fire burned low, candles flickered. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent. "Thank you," Charles said into the quiet, "for inviting me for this." Lily turned from the window where she'd been watching the snow. "I'm glad you came. I wasn't certain you would." "I wasn't certain either, but you did." She moved closer, settling into the chair opposite his. "That took courage." "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like... I don't know what it feels like. Like, maybe joy is still possible," she suggested gently. "Even when you thought it was gone forever?" Charles met her eyes, those impossible amber eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. "How did you know?" he asked. "Yesterday when you saw me. How did you know I was grieving?" "I saw it in your face. The same look my father wore for months after Mama died. The same look I saw in my own mirror." She smiled sadly. "We recognize our own, I think, those of us who've lived through loss. Your sister said something tonight, about heaven having windows. Daisy has her own wisdom. She was so young when we lost Mama. I think it made her see the world differently, more hopefully. And you?" Charles leaned forward. "How do you see the world?" Lily was quiet for a moment, considering. "I see it as still worth living in, still full of moments worth experiencing. The grief doesn't go away, Charles, but it makes room for other things, if you let it." "I don't know if I can." "You're here, aren't you?" She smiled. "That's a start." The clock chimed 9, and Charles realized with surprise that 2 hours had passed. His carriage would be waiting. He rose reluctantly. "I should go." "Yes, I suppose you should." But Lily stood slowly, as if she too was reluctant for the evening to end. She walked him to the door, helped him into his coat. Her fingers brushed his hand as she passed him his gloves, and the contact sent warmth flooding through him. "Will you," she hesitated, "will you come again? To visit, I mean. Daisy would love to see you. She's already decided you're her new favorite person." "And what about you?" The words escaped before Charles could stop them. "Would you love to see me?" Lily looked up at him, and in the dim light of the entrance hall, her face was impossibly lovely. "Yes," she said simply, "I would." The honesty of it stole his breath. "Then I'll come," he promised. He stepped out into the snow, but turned back at the gate. Lily stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm light behind her, watching him go. She raised her hand in farewell. Charles raised his, in return. And as his carriage rolled through the snowy streets toward home, he realized something remarkable. For the first time in 8 months, he was looking forward to tomorrow. Charles returned to the green door 3 days later. He told himself it was to thank them properly for dinner, that it was simple courtesy, nothing more. But as he stood on the familiar steps, his heart beating faster than it should, he knew he was lying to himself. Daisy answered his knock, her face lighting up like Christmas morning all over again. "You came back. Lily said you would, but I was worried you'd forget about us." She grabbed his hand, already a familiar gesture, and pulled him inside. "We're making gingerbread. Come, help." The kitchen was warm and flour-dusted, smelling of spices and sugar. Lily stood at the table, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back with a ribbon, cutting shapes from rolled dough. She looked up when he entered, and her smile made his chest tighten. "Charles, what a lovely surprise. I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not." She gestured to the table covered in cookie cutters, bowls of icing, and scattered flour. "Though I warn you, gingerbread making is serious business in this house. Daisy accepts nothing less than perfection." "That's not true," Daisy protested, laughing. "I just think they should look like something, not lumpy blobs." "My cookies are not lumpy blobs. The horse you made yesterday looked like a sheep." Charles found himself laughing, actually laughing, as the sisters bickered with obvious affection. "Here." Lily pressed a cookie cutter into his hand. "Make yourself useful. Stars are easiest for beginners." For the next hour, Charles did something he'd never done in his life. He made cookies, or tried to. His stars were lopsided. His Christmas trees looked drunk. His attempt at a gingerbread man resulted in something Daisy declared looked like a melted snowman who'd seen a ghost. But no one minded. Lily showed him how to roll the dough evenly. Daisy demonstrated icing techniques with the confidence of a master artist. They laughed at his failures and celebrated his few successes. It was absurd, ridiculous. The Duke of Blackmore, covered in flour, arguing with a 10-year-old about whether his angel had wings or just lumpy arms. It was perfect. "You know," Lily said, watching him carefully pipe icing onto a star, "you're very focused when you concentrate. Your tongue sticks out slightly." Charles immediately pulled his tongue back in, flushing. "It does not." "It does," Daisy crowed. "Look, Lily's right." He tried to glare at them both but couldn't manage it. Not when they were grinning at him like that. Not when the kitchen was so warm and bright. Not when he felt more alive than he had in months. Later, when the cookies were baking, they sat at the small table drinking tea. Daisy had run off to play, leaving Charles and Lily alone in comfortable silence, punctuated by the ticking of the kitchen clock. "You're good with her," Lily said quietly. "With Daisy. She doesn't take to strangers easily, but she adores you. She's a remarkable child." "She is." Lily's expression grew distant. "She was so young when Mama died. Only 6. She doesn't remember much, just impressions, really. A voice, a smell, the feeling of being held." She traced the rim of her teacup. "Sometimes I wonder if that's easier or harder, to lose someone you barely remember." "How old were you?" 16. "Old enough to remember everything." Her voice was steady, but Charles heard the old pain beneath it. "Old enough to have to become the woman of the house overnight. That must have been difficult." "It was necessary." She met his eyes. "My father, he's brilliant, truly, but he lives in his head, in his books and ideas. After Mama died, he couldn't function. Someone had to run the household, to raise Daisy, to keep everything from falling apart. So, you gave up your own life." "I gained a different one." Her smile was bittersweet. "I'd planned to study art, maybe teach, but Daisy needed me, Father needed me, and I learned that sometimes love means changing your plans." Charles thought of his own response to loss, withdrawal, isolation, the bottle. Lily had lost her mother and responded by caring for others. He'd lost Eleanor and responded by caring for no one, not even himself. "You're stronger than I am," he said quietly. "I'm not. I just chose differently." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "There's no right way to grieve, Charles. Only the way that lets you survive." He came back the next day, and the next. Each visit, he stayed a little longer. Each conversation, he revealed a little more. He told them about Eleanor carefully, painfully, like learning to use a limb that had been broken. Lily listened without judgment, without the careful pity he'd grown to hate. She simply heard him, acknowledged his grief, and didn't try to fix it. In return, she shared her own memories of her mother, the way Margaret had sung while she gardened. Her terrible sense of direction that meant family outings often became adventures in getting lost. The strength she'd shown when illness came, facing death with grace and courage. She told me, Lily said one afternoon as they walked through the snowy park, Daisy running ahead, that living was the greatest gift we could give her, that every moment of joy we experienced would be a tribute to her memory. Do you believe that? I'm trying to, she glanced at him. Some days are easier than others. Charles understood that completely. Edmund observed their growing friendship with quiet approval. One evening, when Charles stayed for dinner again, the professor pulled him aside. My daughter doesn't let people in easily, he said. After Margaret died, Lily built walls to protect herself, to protect Daisy. I worried she'd spend her life behind them. I haven't, we're just… Charles fumbled for words. Edmund smiled. I'm not accusing you of anything, my boy. I'm thanking you. Whatever is happening, whatever this is, it's brought light back to her eyes. I'd forgotten how bright they could be. Charles thought about that long after he'd returned home that night. What was this? Friendship? Something more? He was afraid to examine it too closely, afraid that naming it would somehow break its fragile magic. On New Year's Eve, Charles brought gifts. A set of watercolors for Lily, professional quality, the kind she'd never buy for herself. A book of illustrated fairy tales for Daisy. A first-edition poetry collection for Edmund. You didn't have to, Lily protested, but her hands trembled slightly as she touched the paint boxes. I wanted to. They're beautiful. I thank you. Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. Daisy broke the moment, dragging Charles to the window. Look, it's snowing again. Can we build a snowman? Please. So they bundled up and ventured into the small garden behind the house. Charles, Lily, Daisy, and Edmund worked together, rolling snow, stacking sections, arguing cheerfully about the perfect carrot for the nose. Charles found himself in charge of the head, while Lily gathered stones for buttons. She laughed at something Daisy said, her breath clouding in the cold air, snowflakes catching in her dark hair. She was so alive, so present, so full of warmth despite everything she'd lost. Charles wanted to capture this moment forever, wanted to hold on to it like a talisman against the darkness that still lurked at the edges of his mind. Charles, Daisy called, you're staring at Lily again. He flushed scarlet while Lily hid her smile behind her mittened hand. I was not. You were too. Your face goes all soft and funny when you look at her. Daisy, Lily warned, but she was laughing now. Edmund rescued him by declaring the snowman complete and inviting everyone inside for hot chocolate. But as they trooped back into the house, Lily caught Charles's hand. She's not wrong, you know, she said softly. You do stare sometimes. I apologize. Don't. She squeezed his fingers. I like it. That night, as the clock struck midnight, they stood together at the window, watching fireworks bloom across the London sky. Behind them, Edmund dozed in his chair. Daisy had fallen asleep on the sofa hours ago. A new year, Lily murmured. Yes. What will you do with it? Charles looked at her reflection in the glass, her profile limned in silver light, her expression thoughtful and open and impossibly dear. I don't know, he admitted. For so long, I couldn't imagine a future, couldn't see past the grief. But lately, he trailed off. Lately? Lately I've started to wonder if maybe Daisy was right, about heaven having windows, about the people we've lost wanting us to be happy. Lily turned to face him fully. And? What do you think? I think Eleanor would have liked you. The words came out in a rush. I think she would have thought you were remarkable, strong and kind and wise. I think she would have wanted… He stopped, uncertain. Wanted what? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Wanted me to be happy, even if that happiness looked different than we'd planned. Lily reached up, her hand touching his cheek with infinite gentleness. Then be happy, Charles. Not for her, not for me, for yourself, because you deserve it. Charles covered her hand with his own, turning his face into her palm. I'm trying, he said. You make me want to try. Outside, the last of the fireworks faded, leaving only stars and snow and the quiet of a new year beginning. The truth came out in the worst possible way. It was a grey afternoon in early January when Edmund invited Charles to his study. They'd fallen into the habit of discussing literature over brandy. Charles found the professor's insights sharp and engaging, a welcome change from the political droning of his usual company. "I've been meaning to ask," Edmund said, settling into his worn leather chair. "What is it you do, Charles? You've never mentioned your profession." Charles hesitated, the lie he'd been living suddenly feeling like lead in his stomach. "I manage an estate, property matters, mostly." "Ah, a steward then? That's honorable work. Must keep you quite busy." "Yes, quite." He should have told the truth then, should have explained, apologized, made it right. But Lily appeared at the door with tea, and the moment passed. 2 days later, disaster struck. Charles had come to walk with Lily through the park, their routine now, these afternoon walks where they talked about everything and nothing. Daisy accompanied them as chaperone, though she spent most of her time running ahead to examine interesting trees or feed ducks at the pond. They were laughing at something Daisy had said when a carriage rolled past a fine equipage with a familiar crest on the door. Charles's blood went cold. "Nightwell," a voice called from the carriage window. Lord Ashworth, his mother's cousin, leaning out with a jovial wave. "Good to see you out and about. Your mother will be delighted to hear it." The carriage rolled on. Charles stood frozen. Lily had stopped walking. "Nightwell?" she repeated slowly. "Lily, that man called you Nightwell." "I can explain." "Charles Nightwell." Her voice was changing, growing colder. "Not Blackwell, Nightwell." Daisy, sensing the shift in atmosphere, had stopped running and was watching them with wide, worried eyes. Yes, there was no point lying now. Charles Nightwell, the Duke of Blackmore. Lily took a step back as if he'd struck her. "A duke?" The word came out flat, emotionless. "You're a duke. You've been lying to us this entire time." "Not lying." "Exactly. What would you call it then?" Color flooded her cheeks now, anger, hurt, humiliation warring across her face. "You let us believe you were ordinary. You sat at our table, ate our food, let Daisy make you gingerbread cookies." Her voice cracked. "God, we must have seemed so foolish to you, so provincial and small." "That's not true. That was never—" "What were we to you, Charles? Or should I say, Your Grace?" She spat the title like poison. "Some kind of charity project? A duke playing at being common, amusing himself with the poor professor's family?" "Lily, please, did you laugh about us? When you went back to your grand estate, did you tell your servants about the quaint little household that didn't even know they were entertaining nobility?" "I never laughed. I never thought—" Charles reached for her, but she jerked away. "Don't touch me." The words cut deeper than any blade. Daisy started crying. "Why are you fighting?" The little girl's voice was small, frightened. "I don't understand. Why is Lily angry?" Lily's face crumbled. She knelt down, pulling her sister close. "We need to go home, darling. Right now." "But Charles, His Grace has other places to be, other people to deceive." She stood, taking Daisy's hand, and began walking away. Charles followed. "Lily, wait. Let me explain." She whirled on him. "Explain what? That you lied? That you let us believe we were your friends when you were just— What? Slumming? Looking for entertainment? It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Her eyes, those beautiful amber eyes, were bright with unshed tears. "Tell me, Your Grace, what were we to you?" Charles opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain that he'd kept the truth hidden because with them he'd felt like himself again, that he'd been terrified that revealing his title would change everything, would turn their warmth to formality, their friendship to calculated deference? How could he explain that he'd been selfish, yes, but not in the way she thought? "That's what I thought," Lily said quietly when he didn't answer. "We were nothing, a diversion." "You're everything," he finally managed. "You brought me back to life. You and Daisy and your father, you gave me a reason to feel again, to hope again. I wasn't trying to deceive you. I was trying to protect." "Protect what?" "Your amusement, your little game." "My heart," the words burst from him. "I was trying to protect my heart because I was falling." He stopped, horrified at what he'd almost said, but it was too late, and not enough. "Goodbye, Your Grace." Lily's voice was formal now, distant, the voice one used with strangers. "Thank you for your attention to our family. I'm sure you have more important matters to attend to now." She turned and walked away, Daisy's hand in hers, leaving Charles standing alone in the middle of the park. He tried to visit the next day. Edmund answered the door, his usually warm face grave. "I don't think that's wise, Charles. Or should I say, Your Grace?" "Edmund, please." Let me talk to her. She doesn't want to see you. I need to explain. Did you lie about your identity? Charles's shoulders slumped. Yes. Then what is there to explain? Edmund's tone wasn't cruel, just sad. I liked you, Charles. My daughters cared for you, but you let us welcome you as an equal when you were anything but. You let us believe we were building a friendship based on honesty. I wasn't trying to... I know what you weren't trying to do, but intentions matter less than actions, my boy. Edmund sighed. Lily's been hurt before. Did she tell you that? Charles shook his head. 3 years ago, a young man courted her, a gentleman's son. She believed he cared for her, but it turned out he was only amusing himself before his arranged marriage to a woman of his own class. When he left, Lily was devastated. She built walls after that. It took her years to trust again. The words landed like blows. And then you came along, Edmund continued, and she let those walls down. She trusted you. Do you understand what that meant? What it cost her? I never meant to hurt her, but you did. Edmund's expression gentled slightly. I believe you care for her. I believe your feelings are genuine. But you lied, Charles, and that lie has consequences. The door closed softly, but it felt like a coffin lid slamming shut. Charles returned to Nightwell Manor in a daze. Thompson took one look at his face and wisely said nothing, simply helping him out of his coat and withdrawing. Charles climbed the stairs to his study, poured himself a drink, and stared at Eleanor's portrait. I've made a terrible mistake, he whispered to her painted smile. For months after her death, he'd been frozen, numb, half alive at best. Then Lily had appeared like spring after endless winter, and he'd started to thaw, started to feel again joy, hope, connection. All the things he'd thought died with Eleanor, and now, through his own cowardice and selfishness, he'd lost it all. He'd lost Lily. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He loved her. Somewhere between gingerbread cookies and New Year's fireworks and afternoon walks in the park, he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Lily Ashford. And he'd ruined everything. The bottle in his hand looked suddenly appealing. He could drink himself back into numbness, back into that grey half-life where nothing hurt because nothing mattered. But even as he raised the glass, he remembered Daisy's voice. I think it would make them sad if we were all sad all the time. And Lily's. Every moment of joy we experience would be a tribute to her memory. Eleanor wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want him retreating into darkness again. But what could he do? Lily wouldn't see him. Edmund had closed the door. He'd destroyed their trust, and trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. Charles set down the glass untouched. Almost impossible, but not entirely. 3 days passed. Charles didn't leave the manor. He moved through his rooms like a ghost again, but this time the numbness wouldn't come. He'd thought grief was the worst pain possible, but he'd been wrong. This was worse. Grief was passive, something that happened to you, beyond your control. But this pain was active, self-inflicted. He'd had something precious, and through his own cowardice, he'd thrown it away. Eleanor had been taken from him by fate. Lily had been driven away by his choices. The difference was unbearable. On the 4th morning, Thompson entered with breakfast Charles wouldn't eat, and the day's correspondence. Your Grace, there's a that is. A young person has been waiting at the servants' entrance for some time. Charles looked up from where he'd been, staring at nothing. Send them away. Sir, I believe it's the younger Miss Ashford. Charles was on his feet instantly. Daisy? Here. Yes, sir, she's been quite insistent. The staff didn't know whether... Charles was already moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time, racing through the servants' corridors to the back entrance. Daisy stood in the doorway, small and determined, her coat buttoned wrong, her hat askew. She'd clearly dressed herself and come alone. Daisy! Charles dropped to one knee. Does your family know you're here? No. Her chin lifted stubbornly. Lily's crying. She cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. She cried like that when Mama died. Charles's chest constricted. Daisy, did you make her sad? The little girl's eyes were fierce. She won't tell me what happened, but Father's worried, and you don't visit anymore, and everything's wrong. Yes, Charles said quietly. I made her sad. I made a terrible mistake. Then fix it. Daisy's voice rose. That's what you do when you break something, you fix it. That's what Lily always says. Some things can't be fixed, little one. That's what grown-ups always say when they're too scared to try. Tears were streaming down Daisy's face now. I thought you were brave. I thought you were different. But you're just like everyone else, you give up. The words hit Charles like a slap. Was she right? Was he giving up? Again? I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. Yes, you do. Daisy wiped her nose on her sleeve. You tell the truth. You say you're sorry. You show her you mean it. That's what Lily makes me do when I hurt someone. From the mouths of babes, Charles thought again. What if she won't listen? Then you try again. Daisy's face was so earnest, so certain. That's what love means. You don't give up just because it's hard. Love. Yes, that's what this was. He loved Lily, loved her strength and kindness, her gentle wisdom and fierce protectiveness. Loved the way she saw him not as a title or a tragedy, but as a man. And love, real love, didn't give up. Charles sent Daisy home in his carriage with a trusted footman, then returned to his study. He pulled out paper and began to write. Not a letter, words on paper felt too small for what needed to be said, but plans, ideas, ways to show Lily that his feelings were real, that his regret was genuine, that he was willing to fight for what they'd found together. He wrote until his hand cramped, crossed out lines, started over, thought of Eleanor and what she would tell him. Stop thinking and start doing, he could almost hear her say. You always overthink everything, Charles. Sometimes you just have to leap. I'm trying, he whispered to her memory. I'm trying to leap, but doubt still gnawed at him. What if Lily wouldn't forgive him? What if he'd destroyed something that couldn't be rebuilt? What if he fought and still lost? That afternoon, his mother appeared unannounced. The Dowager Duchess swept into his study with all the authority of her position, took one look at his haggard face, and sighed. Oh, Charles, what have you done? Mother, I'm not. I heard you've been consorting with a professor's family, and that you lied about your identity. She held up a hand when he started to protest. Cousin Ashworth told me everything. He thought it terribly amusing. It wasn't, it isn't. Are you in love with her? The direct question stopped him cold. His mother smiled sadly. I thought so. I can see it in your face. You look how your father looked when he courted me, desperate and determined and absolutely terrified. Father was never terrified. Everyone's terrified when they're in love, darling. Especially the second time. She sat down, her expression softening. I loved Eleanor like a daughter. Her loss devastated me almost as much as it devastated you. But Charles, she's been gone 8 months. 8 months of watching you die slowly inside that grief. I'm not... You were. His mother's voice was firm. Until recently. Until you met this Lily Ashford. Thompson tells me you've been eating again, smiling, living. Should I apologize for being grateful someone brought my son back to life? Charles felt tears prick his eyes. I lied to her, Mother. I let her believe I was someone I'm not. Were you? Were you really someone different? His mother leaned forward. Or were you more yourself with them than you've been in years? The title is what you are, Charles, but it's not who you are. She won't forgive me. Have you asked? She won't see me. Then make her see you. His mother stood, her expression determined. You're a duke, for heaven's sake. Use that power for something meaningful. Don't let pride or fear or propriety keep you from the woman you love. Life is too short. Trust me, darling, I know. She kissed his forehead and left, leaving Charles alone with his thoughts. That night, Charles stood at his window, staring out at the snow-covered city. Somewhere out there, Lily was crying, hurting, because of him. He thought of Eleanor and her joy, her certainty that life was meant to be lived fully. He thought of Daisy's fierce insistence that love meant not giving up. He thought of his mother's words about being more himself with the Ashfords than he'd been in years. They were all right. He'd spent 8 months frozen in grief, and Lily had thawed him. She'd given him hope and joy and the possibility of a future. She'd loved him without knowing his title, without any expectation of wealth or status, just him, just Charles. And he'd thrown it away out of cowardice. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Christmas had given him one miracle already, the miracle of feeling alive again. Perhaps it had one more miracle left. Charles turned from the window, his mind made up. He would fight, he would leap, and he would show Lily Ashford that some things, some people were worth the risk of a broken heart. Charles appeared at the green door the next morning, his arms full of white roses. Edmund answered, his expression carefully neutral. Your Grace, please, Charles said. I know she doesn't want to see me. I know I have no right to ask. But I need to say something, and if she won't hear it, Then I'll leave and never trouble your family again." Edmund studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "She's in the sitting room." Lily sat by the window, staring out at nothing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, her usual warmth dimmed to embers. She didn't turn when Charles entered, though she must have heard his footsteps. "I asked you not to come," she said quietly. "I know, and if you still want me to leave after I've spoken, I will. But please, Lily, let me say this." She turned then, and the pain in her eyes nearly undid him. "What could you possibly say that would make this better?" Charles set the roses on the table, Eleanor's favorite flower, now offered to another woman. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. "You asked me what you were to me," he began, "and I couldn't answer. But I can now." He moved closer but didn't touch her, respecting the distance she needed. "When Eleanor died, I died with her. I thought I did anyway. I went through the motions of living, breathing, eating when forced to, signing papers, maintaining appearances, but inside, I was empty. A shell. I didn't want to heal because healing felt like betrayal." Lily's expression softened slightly, but she said nothing. "Then a little girl threw a snowball at me," Charles continued, a faint smile touching his lips, "and her sister apologized with such kindness, such genuine concern for a complete stranger, that something inside me cracked, just a little, just enough to let in a sliver of light." "Charles, please, let me finish." He took a breath. "I lied about who I was because I was terrified. Terrified that if you knew I was a duke, everything would change. You'd treat me with deference instead of friendship. You'd see the title instead of the man. And I needed God. I needed someone to see me. Just Charles. Just a man trying to remember how to be human." "You should have told us," Lily said, but her voice was gentler now. "I know. I was wrong. I was selfish and cowardly, and I hurt you because of it." Charles moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "But Lily, you asked what you were to me. You are everything. You're the reason I started eating again, smiling again, believing that maybe life could still hold joy. You brought me back from the dead." Tears were streaming down Lily's face now. "When I'm with you," Charles continued, his own voice breaking, "I'm not a duke. I'm not a title or an obligation or a man drowning in grief. I'm just myself, the best version of myself, the version Eleanor would have wanted me to be." "Don't use her memory to manipulate me," Lily whispered. "I'm not. I'm honoring it." Charles finally closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Eleanor loved life. She would have told me to fight for you, to not let fear or pride or propriety keep me from the woman who makes me want to live again." "I trusted you," Lily said, her voice small. "I let you in. Do you know how hard that was for me?" "I do now. Your father told me about the man who hurt you before, and I swear to you, Lily, I am not him. I never saw you as less than me. I saw you as more. As everything I'm not strong and brave and full of light." "Then why lie?" "Because I'm an idiot." The simple honesty of it made her laugh through her tears. "Because I was so afraid of losing what we had that I risked it all anyway. Because I'm still learning how to be brave." Lily searched his face, and Charles let her see everything, his regret, his love, his desperate hope. "What are you asking me, Charles?" "I'm asking for a second chance. I'm asking you to forgive me. I'm asking—" He stopped, then pushed forward. "I'm asking if you could possibly love a duke who makes lopsided gingerbread stars and stares at you when he thinks you're not looking, and who spent 8 months dead inside until you brought him back to life." "Charles, I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you care for Daisy and your father. I love how you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love that you made me believe in Christmas miracles again." The silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Then Lily smiled, that beautiful, warm smile that had captured his heart from the first moment. "You really are an idiot," she said softly. "I know. A duke who comes to a professor's house and makes cookies and plays with children. Yes, a man who lied to me but who looks at me like I hung the stars. Always." She reached up, touching his face with infinite gentleness. "I don't forgive easily, Charles Nightwell." His heart sank. "But," she continued, "I also don't love easily, and despite everything, despite the lies and the hurt." She took a shaky breath. "I love you too. God help me. I love you." Charles's breath caught. "You do." "I do. I think I have since that first night at dinner when you answered Daisy's questions with such honesty and tenderness. when you didn't hide behind propriety or pretense, just cared. I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust back, Charles promised. I'll be so honest it's boring. I'll tell you everything, my fears, my doubts, my terrible poetry attempts. You write poetry? Badly. But I'll share it anyway if you want. Lily laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. I might regret this. Probably. We'll have to navigate society. Your world and mine, they're very different. We'll figure it out together. Your mother will probably hate me. She already loves you. She told me to fight for you. Lily blinked. She did? She said. I looked like my father did when he was courting her, desperate and determined, and absolutely terrified. Are you? Terrified? Completely. Charles pulled her closer, but also hopeful, because you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, a future worth imagining. The door burst open, and Daisy flew into the room. Are you done fighting? Can Charles stay? Are you happy again? Lily laughed, pulling her sister into their embrace. Yes, darling, we're done fighting. Good. Daisy beamed up at Charles. Because I already told Father you were going to marry Lily, and he's planning the wedding. Daisy. Lily's face flamed red, but Charles was grinning. Your sister is very wise, Daisy, though I should probably ask properly first. He knelt not just before Lily, but before both sisters, including the child who'd started everything with a snowball and fierce, innocent wisdom. Lily Ashford, he said formally, then smiled. Will you marry a duke who makes terrible cookies and stares at you too much, and who loves you more than he thought possible to love again? Lily pulled him to his feet, her eyes shining. Yes, yes, you ridiculous man. Yes. When their lips met, Daisy cheered. Edmund appeared in the doorway, shaking his head with fond exasperation. I suppose I should congratulate you both. And plan a wedding, Daisy added, with gingerbread cookies and flowers, Lily said, smiling at Charles. White roses. For Eleanor? Charles asked quietly. For new beginnings, Lily corrected gently. We'll honor the past, Charles, but we'll build our own future. That evening, as snow began to fall outside, Charles sat in the Ashford sitting room, his proper place now, not as a guest but as family. Daisy had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Lily sat beside him, her hand in his. Edmund dozed by the fire. Through the window, Charles could see stars emerging in the darkening sky. He thought of Eleanor and hoped she could see this, see him happy, see him whole again. Not because he'd forgotten her, but because he'd learned that love didn't run out, that hearts broken open could hold more, not less. Lily squeezed his hand. What are you thinking? That 8 months ago, I thought my life was over. That joy was impossible, that I'd never feel whole again. And now? Charles looked at her, at this remarkable woman who'd seen past his title and his grief to the man underneath, who'd taught him that healing wasn't betrayal and that loving again didn't mean loving less. Now I believe in Christmas miracles, he said simply. Outside, the snow fell soft and silent, covering London in white. Somewhere in the city, church bells rang. Families gathered. Life went on, as it always did, with its mixture of joy and sorrow, loss and hope. And in a modest house with a green door, a duke who'd forgotten how to live learned to love again, taught by a professor's daughter with amber eyes and a gentle heart, and a 10-year-old girl wise enough to believe in second chances. Christmas had given Charles Nightwell his miracle after all. Not the miracle of escaping grief, but the miracle of surviving it. Not the miracle of forgetting the past, but the miracle of building a future. Not the miracle of never hurting again, but the miracle of daring to love despite the risk. And that, he thought as Lily's head came to rest on his shoulder, was the greatest miracle of all.